Reports today have revealed last April, former Special Operations Commander Major General Adam Findlay told Australian soldiers that Beijing is already engaged in grey zone warfare with Australia and to plan for the likelihood of actual conflict. Grey zone activities are aggressions that fall short of clearly crossing the threshold for war. These can include cyber and propaganda attacks and the coercive use of trade and economic levers. We've already seen those levers pulled with tough Chinese import bans on a raft of Australian products. Today, there have been fresh online propaganda attacks aimed at our troops. This one follows another shocking image from last year.
We reached a position where we can't pick up the phone to anyone in Chinese leadership. The Japanese can, the Indians can, Americans can. We've become the most adversarial towards China of any of the world's nations.
There have been plenty of tough words from our side, with talk of the beating drums of war. Just last week, the PM made it clear the 99-year Chinese lease of Darwin Port could easily be reconsidered.
If there is advice from the Defence Department or our security agencies that change their view about the national security implications, then you could expect me as Prime Minister to take that advice very seriously and to act accordingly.
We ought to be having tough diplomacy with the Chinese. I wouldn't go backwards one step on what we have said publicly about Hong Kong or about the Uyghurs or South China Sea. But I got to say, and a lot of other things, we've gone out of our way to sound declamatory and strident about the China relationship, and we're paying a big price.
Another possible trigger for conflict is Taiwan. China sees the country as a breakaway province and has become more antagonistic about bringing it back under Beijing's control. But our biggest ally, the US, backs Taiwan's current independence.
But Australia's big tilt on China has got us to the point where it's assumed we would go to war with America. But here's the thing. At the present time, we could be the only American ally to fight alongside them.
China's on the verge of being the biggest military and economic power in the world. And until recently, we've always managed to keep open relations and booming trade. But with tensions simmering, can we get the relationship back on track?
Natasha Kassam is the Director of the Public Opinion and Foreign Policy Program at the Lowy Institute, and she joins us now. Natasha, firstly, how realistic is all this talk of drums of war?
I really think that we are getting a little ahead of ourselves here. There's no doubt that risk of conflict in the region has gone up in the last few years. China is becoming more aggressive. It's making more military incursions into disputed waters. But I think in that report, what perhaps the General was trying to encourage the army to think more about is the risk of this kind of grey zone warfare. It's not really what our armed forces are traditionally trained for, and they're having to think more broadly. So I'm not really sure he was saying something unusual in terms of that war threat.
I heard a really interesting comment from a commentator over the weekend that the American idea is that you speak softly and carry a big stick. And at the moment, Australia's speaking loudly and carrying a very small stick. Do you think that that's a fair sort of assessment?
I would say I have real questions about some of the recent decisions that the government has made. It seems to me that the government is quite keen on these statements and these kind of loud moves that perhaps demonstrate our willingness to stand up to threats in the region, but don't have a lot of substance behind them. And I'm thinking, for example, of the MOU between the Victorian government over the Belt and Road Initiative. What I would love to see is real substantive, concrete policy suggestions that do defend the people of Taiwan and their democracy, that does help the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, that helps Australian citizens, Cheng Lei and Yang Hengjun, that are detained in China. You know, there are so many issues that have real-world consequences for Australia and the region. I'm just not sure that we're necessarily fighting the right battles at the moment.
Natasha, thank you so much for helping us get our head around it tonight. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you all for having me.
From expert opinions to in-depth analysis and reporting, the Project YouTube brings you the biggest stories from Australia and around the globe. Hit the subscribe button now for news delivered straight to your feed.